4 million workers stare at screens, waiting for paychecks that never arrive. Essential services grind on, powered by people running on fumes. The vast machine that props up daily life across America has ground to a halt, and the fix depends on negotiations that drag into the night. Picture a federal worker in suburban Virginia, pulling up her bank account on this crisp October morning. The expected deposit from Uncle Sam isn't there. Bills stack up on the kitchen table. Mortgage, utilities, groceries for the kids. She's one of 4 million, including contractors, whose livelihoods hinge on continuous government funding. These aren't abstract figures. They're TSA agents screening bags at crowded airports, their own pockets empty while they work unpaid shifts. Lines stretch endlessly as frustration builds among travelers delayed by understaffed checkpoints. National parks stand silent, gates chained shut, trash overflowing from uncollected bins. Rangers sent home watch from afar as visitors turn away disappointed. Federal buildings in downtown D.C. sit with darkened windows at midday, echoing hallways empty of the usual bustle. Contractors, those invisible backbone providers, send crews home from construction sites and IT projects, tools idle in the autumn sun. This isn't just inconvenience. Shutdowns rip away the veil on guaranteed government obligations. Essential services limp along. Air traffic controllers keep planes flying. Border Patrol maintains watch, but payments delay, creating cracks in the system. Veterans wait for benefits at VA hospitals. Pharmacists explaining holdups to those in wheelchairs. Social Security offices lock doors, leaving seniors in rural towns holding delayed checks amid piling debts. The deeper danger lurks in complacency. We assume perpetual government function, like gravity, always there, unquestioned. But each shutdown exposes fragility. Credit rating agencies hover, ready to downgrade, which spikes borrowing costs for everyone. Markets remember. The assumption that Washington always pays its bills? That's dangerous illusion. When the machine stops, real people pay the price, and the economy feels the tremors far beyond Capitol Hill. Reality operates by different rules than political talking points. What happens when guaranteed isn't? Ask the contractor who built his business on federal promises, now calculating layoffs. Which brings us to the current moment, where all previous warnings converge in this October 2025 standoff. The shutdown hit at midnight on October 1st, after Congress failed to pass a funding bill amid partisan gridlock over healthcare subsidies and spending priorities. House and Senate chambers filled with empty chairs during failed negotiations, divided lines drawn sharp. Trump threatens mass layoffs in the federal sector, amplifying the uncertainty, while neither party yields on signature issues. The debt clock projects ominously on the Capitol dome, ticking toward deeper crisis under a twilight sky. Political dysfunction translates to economic damage overnight. Bond traders in New York watch screens as Treasury yields spike, pricing in the risk premium of gridlock. Credit agencies prepare downgrade memos, analysts poring over data in dimly lit offices. The Washington Monument stands dark, a symbol of institutions frozen while consequences mount. Immediate furloughs hit hundreds of thousands, from airport security to museum staff, with analysts estimating a 0.1 to 0.2 percentage point shave off economic growth for each week this drags on. Remember the 2018-19 shutdown? 35 days of impasse over border funding that cost $11 billion, more than the disputed amount itself. Small businesses shuttered, tourism tanked, and growth stalled. Now, in 2025, the pattern repeats with higher stakes. Federal payments underpin everything from military bases to research grants. When Congress stalls, the ripple starts. Agencies issue furlough notices, operations halt, and the economy absorbs the hit. Markets are already reacting. Pension funds adjust portfolios, factoring in the unreliability. The evidence contradicts reassurances from the podium. Shutdowns aren't harmless theater. They're compounding costs that everyday Americans bear. As negotiations unravel, the question sharpens. How long before this paralysis becomes permanent damage? 2 decades earlier, a similar standoff revealed the same structural weakness. Back in 1995-96, the government endured 2 shutdowns totaling 26 days. 800,000 federal workers received furlough notices, sent home without pay while the political battle raged over budget priorities. Productivity losses mounted to $1.4 billion, a staggering hit at the time. Passport offices papered over windows with stark, "closed" signs, stranding travelers who needed documents for urgent trips abroad. Small restaurants near the Pentagon hung "going out of business" banners. Their lunch crowds vanished as nearby federal offices locked up during business hours. Citizens lined up at Social Security offices, only to find doors bolted shut, applications for benefits piling up unprocessed. The deeper cost wasn't just immediate, it cracked public trust. For the first time on a major scale, Americans saw government payment reliability as something breakable. Contractors, those behind-the-scenes providers of everything from IT support to construction, began factoring in risk premiums on future bids. A CFO in a modest office recalculates numbers, adding buffers for potential delays that could sink his firm. Markets remember what politicians prefer to forget. That precedent established shutdowns as a weapon in fiscal fights, one that leaves lasting scars on the economy's foundation. The data reveals what the speeches conceal. Those 26 days taught a lesson that echoes today. Dysfunction doesn't evaporate when the lights come back on. It lingers in higher costs and eroded confidence. Different dates, different political issues, identical economic damage. The cycle repeats with increasing frequency and decreasing surprise. But the damage doesn't stop at federal employees. It cascades outward, hitting those least equipped to absorb it. Federal contractors face the harshest reality. No guarantee of back pay like direct workers. In Northern Virginia, a small IT firm owner gathers his team in a cramped conference room, explaining layoffs as government projects freeze. Crews pack up tools from half-built sites, paychecks halted mid-month. These businesses, often without deep reserves, unravel quickly, with ripple effects hitting subcontractors and local suppliers who count on steady federal work. Native American tribes feel the pinch acutely. A Navajo health clinic in the Southwest turns away patients, medication shelves bare, because federal funding for Indian health services dries up. Elders wait in dusty parking lots, their conditions worsening without routine care. Scientific research grinds to a halt. A NASA scientist in Houston watches satellite data streams cut off mid-mission. Years of work potentially lost forever. Experiments that can't simply restart. Food safety takes a hit too. Processing plants run lines unchecked as FDA inspectors get called back early, leaving vulnerabilities in the supply chain that could spark health risks down the road. Federal courts operate on fumes. Trials postponed. Defendants left in limbo inside holding cells. Small businesses in military towns suffer as base commissaries limit hours. Local economies built on steady federal spending suddenly starved. Immediate impacts stretch to non-essential services like national parks and museums, where gates close and tourism dollars vanish, hurting nearby shops and guides. Who bears the real cost? Not the politicians still drawing salaries. It's the everyday people discovering their livelihoods tied to Washington's whims. The division isn't between parties. It's between those who recognize paper promises for what they are and those who don't. Shutdowns expose systemic vulnerability, where one gridlock decision in D.C. sends shockwaves through communities nationwide. The contractor laid off today will demand higher rates tomorrow. That's the invisible shutdown cost that compounds forever. Markets don't forget political dysfunction. They just price it into every future transaction. By 2013, the pattern was clear, with a 16-day shutdown in October that hammered home market lessons. The S&P 500 dropped 3% as the impasse dragged on, red lines marking shutdown days on declining graphs across stock exchange floors. Consumer confidence plummeted to its lowest level since 2011. Survey results splashed across newspaper front pages, reflecting households pulling back on spending amid uncertainty. The economy took a $24 billion hit, according to S&P estimates, a figure that captured lost productivity and stalled growth. Fitch placed the U.S. credit rating on negative watch, analysts testifying before Senate committees about the risks of repeated brinkmanship. The Treasury Secretary stood at a podium, a days until default countdown ticking behind him, as the nation edged within hours of a potential default that could have rippled globally. Pension fund managers reviewed portfolios in quiet offices, allocating more for treasury risk, acknowledging that political games now factored into safe haven assets. Most critically, borrowing costs rose permanently, with a risk premium baked into treasury pricing that made future government operations more expensive. The myth that shutdowns are consequence-free shattered here. Markets punish dysfunction, destroying confidence and embedding higher costs that outlast the crisis. Every shutdown teaches the same lesson to those paying attention. How many more before markets price U.S. government function as unreliable? We may be about to find out in 2025. Government shutdowns are treated as political sideshows. The bond market disagrees. Beyond the headlines, a different calculation is happening with the paper promise problem at the heart of modern monetary fragility. Every government obligation boils down to a promise, backed by taxation and borrowing power, but always filtered through political will. Shutdowns expose that fragile layer between commitment and cash. Social Security recipients sit at kitchen tables, holding delayed checks while bills pile high, discovering guaranteed means until Congress says otherwise. Active duty service members at base commissaries swipe cards that decline, their paychecks caught in the gridlock. VA hospital pharmacists explain benefit processing delays to veterans in wheelchairs, prescriptions unfilled as funding freezes. Military pay, veteran benefits, all labeled secure until appropriations stall. The dollar itself rests on faith in government stability. When basic operations implode, that confidence erodes at the margins. Currency traders in Hong Kong analyze dollar weakness against the euro during these crises, screens showing subtle shifts as international faith wavers. Treasury bond auctions draw lower than expected demand, investors hesitating amid the chaos. Promises become contingent, conditional on political deals rather than ironclad guarantees. The real expense doesn't appear until years later, in the form of higher interest rates and diminished trust. No amount of political spin changes the mathematics of missed payments. Guaranteed federal payments are guaranteed only until Congress decides they aren't. When you examine your own dependence on government function, the question becomes personal. Anyone receiving federal payments discovers the same truth eventually. These are paper promises, revocable under stress, and recognizing that empowers you to build resilience beyond them. Direct shutdown costs add up fast, but they understate the true damage. Take the visible hits. Closed parks where families plan vacations, furloughed workers dipping into savings, small businesses near federal sites watching revenue dry up. Yet the real toll hides in accumulated loss of confidence in government promises. This erodes bond yields, making every future government action more expensive forever. Markets adjust silently, embedding higher rates that compound over years. Currency strength takes a beating too, reducing American purchasing power on the global stage. A TSA agent works unpaid shifts at airport security, eyeing a second job that might violate federal rules, while her family's budget tightens. Defense contractors in Northern Virginia weigh diversifying away from government reliance, spreadsheets showing the math of uncertainty. Social Security recipients in rural Kentucky hold delayed checks, prescriptions going unfilled, health at risk. Geopolitical influence wanes as dollar sanctions lose bite. They only work if the dollar remains indispensable. Each shutdown accelerates international de-dollarization discussions, with Chinese central bankers sliding presentations that highlight U.S. dysfunction as a reliability red flag. The official cost estimates ignore the most expensive damage, that permanent premium on treasury bonds, the subtle dollar slide, the diminished sway in global affairs. While Americans watch the political theater, markets are making permanent adjustments. What they don't mention in the press conferences is how this brittleness warns of deeper systemic risks. The machine will restart eventually. It always does. But each shutdown leaves permanent damage in the gears. Higher interest rates, reduced confidence, eroded credibility. What looks like temporary dysfunction is actually permanent cost. What sounds like guaranteed promises are actually contingent agreements. The protection isn't hoping the machine never stops again. The protection is recognizing it will stop and positioning accordingly. Individual protection starts with seeing guaranteed government payments as contingent political promises. Diversify income sources. Build skills in private sectors that thrive independent of federal flows. Hold assets beyond purely dollar-denominated forms, like international investments or tangible goods that hedge against currency wobbles. Document transferable skills, from project management to tech expertise, that create value no matter Washington's state. A defense contractor calculates his pivot, reviewing non-federal contracts. An individual checks side hustles, ensuring cash flow outside government ties. Review international allocations, balancing portfolios against de-dollarization trends. The next shutdown is already being negotiated. Position yourself now. If this changed your view of guaranteed federal payments, subscribe. The patterns repeat, but awareness empowers. The stakes become clearer when you examine the international dimension. Dollar's reserve currency status hangs on perceived stability, a throne built over decades, but fragile under repeated assaults. China and Russia push alternatives aggressively, their central bankers presenting BRICS payment systems to packed international audiences, slides highlighting U.S. shutdowns as proof of unreliability. Russian oil deals settle in yuan, bypassing dollars, while Saudi finance ministers meet Chinese delegations to discuss non-dollar trade routes. Repeated shutdowns and debt ceiling dramas hand ammunition to de-dollarization advocates, chipping away at American seigniorage, the profit from issuing the world's go-to currency. Each crisis drains revenue as foreign central banks trim treasury holdings, vaults stacking gold bars beside reduced stacks of U.S. bonds. International conference rooms buzz with dollar alternative talks, delegates nodding as dysfunction in Washington provides the perfect exhibit. Losing reserve status would hit hard. Higher borrowing costs for the U.S., reduced purchasing power abroad, weakened sanctions that rely on dollar dominance. Foreign central banks have contingency plans for U.S. government dysfunction that would alarm most Americans. The dollar's strength isn't inherent, it's behavioral, and behavior changes. Essential government function isn't a feature of democracy, it's an achievement that requires maintenance. Reserve currency status is earned over decades and lost in moments. Shutdowns provide those moments. Which brings us to the current moment, where accumulated vulnerabilities meet fresh crisis in this 2025 reality. Federal debt towers at $36 trillion, a counter spinning wildly outside the National Debt Office, numbers blurring in the October chill. Interest payments now eclipse defense spending, Treasury charts laying bare the imbalance as shutdown threats amplify the strain. Inflation hovers above target, making fiscal chaos more perilous. Every delayed payment risks fueling price pressures. Commercial real estate in D.C. slumps further, empty office buildings sprouting for lease, signs like weeds. The shutdown accelerating vacancies as federal workers stay home. Critical infrastructure projects stall nationwide. Highway construction sites silent with idle equipment and workers packing up. Funding releases frozen in gridlock. Global tensions simmer. China's maneuvers, Russia's aggressions, Middle East flare-ups, rendering U.S. dysfunction especially dangerous. Military readiness briefings noting postponed training exercises that weaken response capabilities. This October 1 shutdown, with Trump administration threats of mass federal layoffs, injects extra uncertainty. Analysts warning it could shave 0.1 to 0.2 percentage points off growth per week. International investors eye Bloomberg screens. U.S. shutdown. Day 1. Chyrons flashing as yields tick up. Credit rating agencies have explicitly warned the next downgrade is likely. This could be the tipping point that shatters international confidence, turning temporary paralysis into lasting precedent. When government demonstrates it cannot perform basic operations, the question becomes, what else is negotiable? Direct shutdown costs add up fast, but they understate the true damage. Take the visible hits. Closed parks where families planned vacations, furloughed workers dipping into savings, small businesses near federal sites watching revenue dry up. Yet the real toll hides in accumulated loss of confidence in government promises. This erodes bond yields, making every future government action more expensive forever. Markets adjust silently, embedding higher rates that compound over years, with analysts estimating each week of shutdown shaving 0.1 to 0.2 percentage points off growth, losses that linger if layoffs turn permanent. Currency strength takes a beating too, reducing American purchasing power on the global stage. The dollar slips as investors question U.S. stability, screens in trading rooms showing declines against the euro and yen amid the chaos. A TSA agent works unpaid shifts at airport security, eyeing a second job that might violate federal rules, while her family's budget tightens. Defense contractors in Northern Virginia weigh diversifying away from government reliance, spreadsheets showing the math of uncertainty. Social Security recipients in rural Kentucky hold delayed checks, prescriptions going unfilled, health at risk. Geopolitical influence wanes as dollar sanctions lose bite. They only work if the dollar remains indispensable. Each shutdown accelerates international de-dollarization discussions, with Chinese central bankers sliding presentations that highlight U.S. dysfunction as a reliability red flag. The official cost estimates ignore the most expensive damage: that permanent premium on Treasury bonds, the subtle dollar slide, the diminished sway in global affairs. Credit agencies prepare downgrade analysis that politicians hope never becomes public, but the data reveals what the speeches conceal. While Americans watch the political theater, markets are making permanent adjustments. What they don't mention in the press conferences is how this brittleness warns of deeper systemic risks. The machine will restart eventually. It always does. But each shutdown leaves permanent damage in the gears: higher interest rates, reduced confidence, eroded credibility. What looks like temporary dysfunction is actually permanent cost. What sounds like guaranteed promises are actually contingent agreements. The protection isn't hoping the machine never stops again. The protection is recognizing it will stop and positioning accordingly. Individual protection starts with seeing guaranteed government payments as contingent political promises. Diversify income sources. Build skills in private sectors that thrive independent of federal flows. Hold assets beyond purely dollar-denominated forms, like international investments or tangible goods that hedge against currency wobbles. Document transferable skills, from project management to tech expertise, that create value no matter Washington's state. A defense contractor calculates his pivot, reviewing non-federal contracts. An individual checks side hustles, ensuring cash flow outside government ties. Review international allocations, balancing portfolios against de-dollarization trends. The next shutdown is already being negotiated. Position yourself now. If this changed your view of guaranteed federal payments, subscribe.